The gunshots echoed through the church walls like thunder, freezing the holy water on my fingertips. I stood there, paralyzed, the infant Miguel still cradled in my arms, his baptismal gown gleaming white against the sudden darkness that had fallen over St. Catherine's. The screams came next, piercing, desperate, drowning out the prayers we had been reciting moments before. 3 masked men had burst through the wooden doors, assault rifles raised, hatred burning in their eyes. "Everyone on the ground!" one of them shouted, his voice distorted by the black mask covering his face. But I couldn't move. Something kept me standing at the baptismal font. The baby pressed against my chest, my white vestments suddenly feeling like a target against the church's colored light, streaming through stained glass. I knew I was going to die that Sunday afternoon in San Bernardino. Yet in that moment of certain death, as the leader of the attackers raised his weapon and aimed directly at me and the child, I saw it, a shimmer of blue light, like water reflecting sunlight, materializing between us and the gunman. The leader's finger froze on the trigger, his eyes widened with something I can only describe as terror. Because where there had been nothing but air moments before, now stood a woman clothed in brilliant blue, her presence filling the church with light that no human source could generate. Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, Mother of God, had appeared in physical form, placing herself between killers and the innocent. What happened next would forever change not only my life, but the lives of everyone present that day. I wasn't always a priest. The path that led me to that baptismal font in California began 37 years earlier in Boston, Massachusetts, where I grew up in a family that barely acknowledged God's existence. My father worked 60-hour weeks at an insurance firm, and my mother taught piano lessons to neighborhood children. Religion was something other people did, something we respected from a distance, but never embraced ourselves. I was Jack Sullivan then, not Father Jack, a bright but restless child who excelled in school without much effort and spent most of his free time playing baseball in the cramped streets of our working-class neighborhood. My first encounter with Catholicism came through Marco Ruiz, a Puerto Rican boy who moved in down the street when we were both 10. His family had pictures of saints and crucifixes in every room of their small apartment. They said grace before meals and prayed the rosary together in the evenings, practices that seemed foreign and oddly fascinating to me when I visited. Marco's mother always invited me to join them, but I would just sit awkwardly, watching their lips move in unison, their fingers sliding over beads that seemed to hold some mysterious power. "One day you'll understand," Marco's mother would say to me with a gentle smile, and I would nod politely while thinking that would never happen. It wasn't religion that eventually drew me to the church, it was music. By 17, I had become a reasonably talented pianist, thanks to my mother's persistent teaching. When the choir director at St. Mary's, the Catholic church a few blocks from our house, heard me playing at a school recital, she approached me about playing for their Sunday services. The pay wasn't much, but it was my first real job, and I took it despite my parents' raised eyebrows. "Just don't come home wearing a crucifix," my father had joked. For 3 years, I played the ancient pipe organ at St. Mary's without absorbing much of the faith happening around me. I was there to work, to make music, to earn my modest paycheck. The rituals remained beautiful but empty performances to my eyes until the accident. My brother Michael, 2 years younger than me and the true star athlete of our family, was killed instantly when a drunk driver ran a red light and struck his car broadside. He was 20, with a baseball scholarship and his whole life ahead of him. I was 22, with nothing but questions that seemed to have no answers. The days after Michael's death passed in a haze of grief. I stopped playing at the church. I stopped doing much of anything. My parents retreated into a silence so complete it felt like they had disappeared, along with Michael. Then one evening, nearly a month after the funeral, I found myself wandering the streets aimlessly, eventually stopping outside St. Mary's. The evening mass was just ending, and without conscious thought, I slipped inside and sat in the last pew. Father Donovan, the elderly priest I had worked with for 3 years but barely spoken to beyond music selections, noticed me sitting there long after everyone had gone. He sat beside me without speaking for what felt like hours, until finally I broke down. All the rage and sorrow and confusion poured out of me in a flood of tears and accusations. Against God, against the church, against the empty platitudes people had offered at the funeral. Father Donovan didn't offer platitudes. He didn't even mention God. He simply listened. When I had exhausted myself, he said something I've never forgotten. "Jack, faith isn't about having answers. It's about finding the strength to live with the questions." Then he invited me back to play for the Sunday Mass if I felt up to it. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door. I returned that Sunday, though I couldn't tell you why. Perhaps it was simply that the church was the one place where my grief didn't feel out of place. I played mechanically at first, but then something happened during the communion hymn. As my fingers moved over the keys of Ave Maria, I felt, for the first time since Michael's death, a sense of peace washing over me. Not happiness, not answers, just peace. And somewhere in the music, I felt a presence that I can only describe as maternal, comforting, encompassing, completely accepting. It would be 3 more years before I entered the seminary, years filled with gradual awakening and deepening connection to the faith. My parents never fully understood my decision, but they respected it in their own quiet way. My father even came to my ordination, though my mother had passed away 6 months earlier from breast cancer. "You always were stubborn when you found something you believed in," he said afterward, a gruff acknowledgement that was the closest he ever came to blessing my vocation. After ordination, I served in parishes across Massachusetts for 12 years, eventually becoming known for my work with youth and music ministry. Then came the call that would change everything, an opportunity to serve in a predominantly Latino parish in San Bernardino, California. St. Catherine's needed a priest who could bridge cultures, someone comfortable with both English and Spanish liturgies, someone willing to serve a community that was growing rapidly but still struggling with poverty and the tensions of immigration. My superiors thought my background in music ministry and my openness to cultural diversity made me a good fit. I wasn't so sure, but I felt called to accept the challenge. San Bernardino greeted me with relentless sunshine and a warmth that went beyond the climate. The parishioners of St. Catherine's, mostly Mexican and Central American families who had come to California seeking better lives, embraced me with an enthusiasm that was both flattering and overwhelming. They invited me into their homes, fed me homemade tamales and pozole, taught me the Spanish phrases my seminary classes had missed, and gently corrected my pronunciation. They also shared their struggles, the fears of deportation, the challenges of raising children between 2 cultures, the economic hardships that never seemed to ease no matter how hard they worked. Miguel's family was among the first I came to know well. His parents, Elena and Roberto Garcia, had crossed the border from Mexico 10 years earlier. Roberto worked construction jobs that came and went with the economy. Elena cleaned houses in the wealthy neighborhoods of nearby Redlands. They had 3 daughters already, beautiful, serious girls aged 8, 6, and 4, but Miguel was their first son, born after years of prayer. His baptism was not just a sacrament, but a celebration of answered prayers, a community event that had been planned for weeks. The church was full that Sunday afternoon. Miguel, just 6 weeks old, was dressed in a hand-embroidered baptismal gown that Elena told me had been in her family for generations, brought across the border with care among their few precious possessions. The godparents, Roberto's brother and Elena's sister, stood proudly beside us at the font. We had completed the initial rites, the prayers and anointings, and I had just dipped my fingers into the holy water to perform the baptism itself when the doors burst open. Later, the police would tell us that the attackers were members of a white supremacist group that had been growing more active in the region. Their specific target was St. Catherine's because of its visible ministry to undocumented immigrants. They had planned their attack for weeks, choosing the baptism because they knew the church would be full and many families would be present. Their intent, as one would later confess after arrest, was to create maximum terror in the immigrant community, to make them afraid to gather, to worship, to live openly in America. In the moment, however, I knew none of this. I knew only that death had entered the sanctuary, that 60 people, including many children, were at the mercy of men who saw them as something less than human. The leader advanced toward the font, his rifle trained on Miguel and me. "You first, Father," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even through the mask. "You and the little wetback can meet your God together. I should tell you now that I am not a brave man by nature. I have no military training, no background in self-defense. In my younger days, I avoided physical confrontation at all costs, but in that moment, something beyond my understanding took hold of me. I turned slightly, shielding Miguel with my body, and looked directly into the eyes of the gunman. "In the name of Christ, I beg you to reconsider what you're doing," I said, my voice steadier than I could have imagined possible. He laughed, a hollow, terrible sound in the sacred space, and took another step forward. "Christ isn't here today, Father, but don't worry, I'll send you to him." He raised his weapon higher, aligning it with my head, and I closed my eyes, whispering a final prayer. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, protect these children." The gunshot never came. Instead, I heard a gasp, not of pain, but of shock. I opened my eyes to witness what I can only describe as the impossible. Between the gunman and myself stood a figure that had not been there seconds before. A woman of impossible beauty, clothed in flowing blue robes that seemed to be made of light rather than fabric. Her presence filled the church with a radiance that was almost blinding, yet somehow gentle on the eyes. Though I had never seen her face before, I knew immediately who she was, the same presence I had felt years ago while playing Ave Maria at St. Mary's. The Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, standing physically before us. She spoke no words, but raised one hand toward the gunman in a gesture that was not threatening, but definitive, a boundary they could not cross. The leader stumbled backward, his rifle clattering to the floor. The other two attackers froze in place, their weapons lowered, their eyes wide with something beyond fear. What happened next remains difficult to describe in human language. The light emanating from the Virgin seemed to intensify, filling every corner of the church with a blue-gold radiance. Time itself seemed to slow around us. I felt Miguel stir in my arms, not crying but cooing softly, reaching one tiny hand toward the light. Around the church, I became aware of the congregation, not panicking now but silent, witnessing, many of them kneeling spontaneously in the aisles. The leader of the attackers tore his mask off, revealing a young face contorted with confusion and terror. "What is this?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "What are you doing to us?" But even as he spoke, I could see the change beginning in his eyes, the hatred being burnt away by something stronger, like ice melting under an intense flame. The Virgin turned slightly toward him, her face expressing a sorrow and compassion so profound that I felt tears streaming down my own cheeks. She extended her hand toward him now, the same hand that had created the boundary, now offering reconciliation. The young man fell to his knees, his body shaking with sobs. The other two attackers remained frozen, but their postures had changed from aggression to awe. How long this tableau lasted I cannot say. Time had ceased to have meaning. But gradually the light began to recede, gathering itself back into the figure of Mary. She turned to me once more, her eyes meeting mine with a gaze that conveyed both blessing and commission. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, she was gone. Not dramatically, but simply present, and then not present, like a candle extinguished without smoke. In the profound silence that followed, Miguel began to cry, an ordinary, hungry baby's cry that somehow broke the spell of the extraordinary. Elena rushed forward to take him from my arms, tears streaming down her face. The congregation began to move, embracing one another, weeping, praying. and the attackers remained where they had fallen, disarmed now not by force, but by something far more powerful. When the police arrived, responding to multiple 911 calls from people outside who had heard the initial gunshots, they found a scene they couldn't comprehend. 3 known violent extremists sitting quietly on the floor of the church, their weapons pushed away from them, offering no resistance. A congregation not in panic, but in prayer. And me, still standing at the baptismal font, completing the sacrament that had been interrupted, pouring the water over Miguel's head, and pronouncing the ancient words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The aftermath unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. The media descended on St. Catherine's within hours, local stations at first, then national networks, finally international press. Everyone wanted the story of what they were calling the San Bernardino miracle. Skeptics immediately proposed explanations: mass hallucination triggered by trauma, a sophisticated holographic projection, even a deliberate hoax staged for publicity or political purposes. Yet these theories faltered against the evidence. 63 people, including the attackers themselves, had witnessed the same phenomenon. Security cameras outside the church had captured the strange light flooding through the windows and doors. Most compelling of all was the transformation in the attackers, especially the leader, a 24-year-old named Derek Wilson, whose history of violent rhetoric and hate crimes was well documented. Psychologists who interviewed him in custody found a man profoundly changed, describing an experience of unconditional love that made hatred impossible. For the community of St. Catherine's, the miracle had effects beyond the immediate salvation from violence. The church became a pilgrimage site, with visitors coming from across the country and around the world. Some came seeking healing, others confirmation of their faith, still others out of simple curiosity. We did our best to welcome them all while maintaining the church's primary identity as a parish home for its local community. Many of the parishioners reported ongoing experiences of grace, physical healings, reconciliations in broken families, freedom from addictions. Elena and Roberto, Miguel's parents, found their immigration status resolved through the unexpected intervention of a lawyer who had heard about the miracle and offered his services pro bono. The 3 attackers, despite facing serious criminal charges, found themselves surrounded by the most unlikely advocates, members of the very community they had come to terrorize, who visited them in jail and spoke at their hearings about forgiveness and redemption. As for me, I struggled with how to integrate the miracle into my understanding of priesthood and faith. I'd been raised on stories of Marian apparitions, Guadalupe, Lourdes, Fatima, but had always viewed them with a modern skepticism, as events of the distant past embellished by centuries of retelling. Now, I had not just witnessed, but participated in such an event. I found myself alternating between profound gratitude and a strange imposter syndrome, wondering why I had been present for such a grace when more worthy priests served their flocks without supernatural intervention. In prayer one night, about 6 months after the event, I received a clarity that has guided me since. The miracle at St. Catherine's wasn't about me at all. Nor was it primarily about saving those present from physical harm, though that was a blessed outcome. The miracle was a message for a time of division, a divine reminder that barriers of hatred are illusions that cannot stand against the reality of love. I understood then why the apparition had come as Mary rather than as Christ himself. In our divided world, even Jesus has been co-opted by ideologies, claimed as the exclusive property of particular groups. But Mary, mother, protector, woman of courage and compassion, speaks to something that transcends political and even religious boundaries. Her protection of Miguel that day was a protection of all children, all vulnerable ones, a living embodiment of what every human heart knows to be true, that the innocent deserve our defense, regardless of where they were born or what papers they carry. 3 years have passed since that day at the baptismal font. St. Catherine's has been transformed, expanded, its ministries reaching far beyond its original parish boundaries. The shrine to Our Lady of San Bernardino, as she has come to be known, occupies a small chapel adjacent to the main sanctuary, simple and dignified, offering a place for prayer rather than spectacle. Miguel is an active toddler now, too young to remember what happened, but growing up with the story as part of his identity. His parents have become leaders in the parish, particularly in ministry to immigrants facing legal challenges. Derek Wilson and his 2 companions served brief sentences, more symbolic than punitive given the extraordinary circumstances and their evident transformation. Upon release, Derek asked to meet with me privately. I expected perhaps an apology, a formal acknowledgement of the harm he had intended. What I received instead was a conversation about vocation. "I can never undo what I planned to do," he told me, his eyes clear and direct in a way they hadn't been that day in the church. "But I can spend the rest of my life working against the hatred that consumed me." Today, Derek works with a non-profit that helps young people exit extremist movements. He speaks at schools and community centers about the seductive nature of hatred and the path back to humanity. He has received death threats from his former associates, but continues his work with a steadfastness that I can only admire. He does not call himself Catholic, though he attends Mass occasionally, sitting quietly in the back pew much as I once did at St. Mary's. "I'm not ready for labels," he told me once, "but I believe in what I saw that day." The theologians and church authorities have been characteristically cautious about the events at St. Catherine's. An official investigation was opened, testimonies collected, evidence examined. The local bishop supported us throughout, visiting often and providing wise counsel as we navigated the challenges of becoming an unexpected center of pilgrimage. 3 years on, the Church has not made any formal declaration about the miraculous nature of what occurred. Such processes take decades, sometimes centuries, but they have permitted the devotion to Our Lady of San Bernardino to continue, recognizing the authentic fruits of faith, hope, and charity that have grown from that day. As for me, I remain at St. Catherine's, changed but still fundamentally the same priest I was before, trying to serve faithfully, still playing the piano for special masses, still struggling with administrative duties and budget committees like priests everywhere. The only difference is that now, when I look at the baptismal font where it all happened, I see not just a sacramental object, but a boundary between worlds. A place where, for one afternoon, heaven reached down and made itself visible in our broken world. I have been asked 1,000 times if I was afraid when I stood between that gun and the baby. The honest answer is yes, terrified beyond words. But I have come to understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. For me, in that moment, it was faith, not a perfect faith without doubts, but the simple conviction that what I was protecting mattered more than my own safety. That same conviction is what our world needs now, the willingness to stand in the breach for one another, to see the humanity in those we are taught to fear or hate, to recognize that the divisions between us are never as real or as important as the bonds that could unite us. The miracle at St. Catherine's may have been supernatural in manifestation, but its message was profoundly human. That love is the only force powerful enough to transform hatred into healing. I don't know if I will ever witness another miracle in my lifetime. Part of me hopes I won't, not because the experience wasn't beautiful beyond description, but because such moments come with a responsibility that weighs heavily. Yet if Our Lady chose a regular, doubting, imperfect priest like me to witness her protection once, perhaps the message is that all of us, miraculous or mundane, have been given the capacity to manifest divine love in our ordinary actions. Miguel's baptism was completed that day amidst tears and wonder, As is customary, I told his parents and godparents that they were responsible for raising him in the faith, for teaching him to keep God's commandments by loving God and neighbor. What I didn't say, but perhaps should have, was that Miguel had already received the most powerful catechesis possible, not through words, but through presence. Before he could speak or understand language, he had been held in the light of unconditional love, protected by a mother's heart that encompasses all creation. That is the inheritance I hope for all children, not necessarily dramatic interventions or visible miracles, but the steady, reliable miracle of being loved beyond measure, valued beyond price, protected with fierce devotion. Whether that love comes through the blue light of a Marian apparition or through the everyday sacrifices of parents, teachers, neighbors, and strangers, it is the same love, divine in origin, human in expression, powerful enough to overcome even the darkest hatred. So I ask you now, having shared this story, do you believe that the Mother of God still acts in our world today? Has this account of what happened at St. Catherine's touched something in your own life? If you trust in the protection of the Mother of God, consider sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it. In a world so often defined by division and fear, perhaps what we need most are reminders that love breaks through barriers we believe impenetrable, that grace appears in the most unexpected places, and that none of us, not even those who have given themselves to hatred, are beyond the reach of mercy. The light that filled St. Catherine's that Sunday afternoon has never fully left us. I see it reflected in Miguel's eyes when his family brings him to Mass, in the faces of former enemies now working together for reconciliation, in the quiet determination of immigrants continuing to build lives of dignity despite obstacles. It is a light available to all who seek it, a protection offered to everyone willing to receive it. And it begins, as all the most important things do, with saying yes to love, even and especially when facing hatred. This is the miracle that continues long after the apparition fades. The miracle of ordinary people choosing extraordinary love day after ordinary day.